can already give instead of just doing things for their own sake. And this is what contradicts the will of the master. This will to receive was given to us at that point at which we were created. So on one hand, the Creator put desire into us, and He wants to fill us. And on the other hand, He wants us to acquire His property of bestowal. So really, both of these desires belong to the Creator. Even though we are immersed in egotistical desire, at the same time, we're included in the Creator's original desire. And conversely, when we eventually acquire altruistic desire, we will still remain inside the Creator's will. And that's because there is nothing but the Creator's will, His power over us. That's the meaning of there's none else besides Him. But a person can choose which power, which force he's going to submit to. I mean, which aspect of the Creator's desire is going to influence him. He can choose one of the two. So why don't we then feel these two desires equally? In higher reality, when we enter the spiritual world and we begin ascending, we ascend in the middle line, so that these two choices, whether to be under the power of egoism or under the power of altruism, at that point, they're perceived by us as equivalent. And this state is referred to as klipat noga, which is between bestowal and reception. Sometimes we belong to one, and sometimes we belong to the other. And that really is what man is like. So what he needs to do is to place himself in a neutral position between the properties of bestowal and reception. And when he reaches that state of neutrality, then he becomes free to make his own decisions. That's what we call freedom. Bala Salam continues, animate. We see that each animal has its own characteristic. They are not confined to the environment, but each of them has its own sensation and characteristic. They can certainly operate against the will of the landlord, meaning they can work in bestowal and are also not confined to the environment, but their own life. Their vitality does not depend on their friend's life. Each animate creature is special in its own way. It's not enslaved by the environment, and it has its own properties and its own feelings. In the physical world, we see that every animal can move freely and independently of the others, but they still submit to the laws that are common to their species. And so you see a lot of species breed and hibernate at the same fixed periods of time. So likewise, in the spiritual, each on the animate level has its own sensations and its own properties. He's not enslaved by society anymore. He has a greater degree of freedom to go against the master's will, against the will to receive, than the vegetative level. He can create his own environment. Now, he still somewhat needs his natural egoistic society, but he's not completely dependent on it. Yet, they cannot feel more than their own being. In other words, they have no sensation of the other, and naturally cannot care for the other. So, the animate level has a high degree of independence, but it lacks one very important thing. It only has the ability to sense itself. That's what it means by in the present. It doesn't feel others. And the highest states are the interconnected states. So he describes the speaking level. Speaking has virtues. 1, it acts against the will of the landlord. 2, it is not confined to its contemporaries like the vegetative, meaning it's independent from society. And 3, it also feels the other, and hence can care for them and complement them by feeling and regretting with the collective. It can also rejoice in the solace of the collective and receive from the past and from the future. Animals, however, only feel the present and only their own being. In other words, 1, he can completely defy the master's will. He can bestow rather than receive. 2, Unlike plants, he doesn't depend on other people. In other words, he doesn't depend on his environment to fill him. 3, he feels others, so he can take care of them and satisfy their needs. And that's what bestowal is. He has the capability to do pretty much what the Creator does. And his relationship to his society is that of an adult. He can create a society, and within that society, he can act completely against the master and create a society which is purely altruistic. And as he begins to nullify his egoistic properties, he finds himself increasingly interconnected with the society by choice. And he discovers that there is a true equality between him and the whole. And this is the level of absolute love, when man becomes equal to the Creator. He can share the suffering of society, which means that he acquires their desires, their empty vessels. He also shares their joys, which means that now he can fill their needs with the light within himself, so that all of society will feel it. By doing this, man rises to the root of his soul, and he includes all other souls. And in the likeness of the collective soul, Adam, he corrects all of them. Now, the others don't feel this correction yet, but the person at this level corrects the part of him that's in all of them. And by attaching them to himself as the corrected part of himself, he can reach his individual final correction. And now he can receive both from the past and the future, whereas the animate level of spirituality can only feel itself in the present. Join us again.